Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to be talking about internet safety today, and this is such a hot topic. I know that all of us want to keep our kids safe online, so we have a crime analyst from the city of Lenexa Police Department. Her name is Lindsey Calvillo, and she is going to be talking to us about her tips and suggestions on how to keep our kids safe online. With that, let's get to Lindsey.
Thanks for having me. I think it's important that we have this discussion, and I think that it's a great discussion and a great starting point for parents, for families, and I really appreciate being able to share it with the community.
Yeah. So talk to us, what do we as parents need to know about the internet and our children, like those things coming together?
The biggest thing is to just not panic. And to know that it's there, because your kids, whether they're doing it at home or at school or with their friends, they're going to be online, and that's okay. And it's just important to remember that it's not this big, it doesn't have to be this big scary element. It's something that we can manage and that we can talk about with our kids to make sure that they are as safe as they can be and as ready as they can be for what's out there.
Yeah. So just being prepared is, or
Yes.
aware, is the key. So what are the realities that something bad could really happen to kids online? I think, as parents, we try to kind of shield our eyes, I think, a little bit, or
Right.
think it won't be my kid. But I think the more that I'm learning, the more that it definitely can be all of our kids. So not to be scary, but we do need to be aware. So what's the reality that things that we would term bad do happen to kids online?
It is something we need to be aware of. There's varying degrees of what bad could be online, because I think that the first thing people always think about is taken, or they think about my kid is going to be exploited online or become human trafficked. And the reality of that is it's a smaller percentage than you think. But realistically, every single day we're seeing kids that are dealing with cyberbullying. So that's something that they're going to deal with online. And that starts even as young as elementary school. I have a 4th grader, and some of his friends have devices and social media and things like that already. So we're already seeing things from the school about cyberbullying happening there. You're going to see things that are there. There's always a chance that when somebody signs up for a social media account, that somebody, if they don't make it private, somebody they don't know is going to send them unsolicited things that you don't want them to see. Whether that's some complete stranger, which it absolutely can happen and it does happen, or whether it's somebody from school, because it could be somebody, one of their friends, it could be a classmate, it could be somebody from one of their sports teams. They're probably going to see at some point an unsolicited photo that you don't want them to see, or that they don't need to see and don't understand. Another big thing that we see with kids, particularly with boys, they will end up contacting someone will contact them through Instagram or Snapchat or any of these various, or TikTok, and start a conversation with them. Sometimes it even starts through the PlayStation or the gaming systems, and they'll start talking to somebody and they think that they're talking to somebody that's their age. So the biggest is 6th through probably 10th grade is where I see this the most, that we see come across my desk. And it's kids who are talking to somebody online who tells them that they're a 13-year-old girl, and they show them these pictures so that they'll also send pictures, and they say, hey, send me a picture. So then they send the boy that picture, and then the boy reciprocates and sends something back. And now they have somebody who is telling them, send me more. I'm going to send this to your entire friends list. I'm going to send this to your parents, to your siblings, to your family. So send me money or send me more pictures. And that sort of thing is probably what we see the most of at the local level, because frankly, a lot of boys just don't think that, oh, somebody's sending me this, I'll go ahead and send them a picture. It's okay. And then they get caught in this trap. And we see that a lot. Another thing that we see a lot of is kids from school who get into relationships that they're not really ready for. So someone tries to pressure them into something, like sending pictures or doing acts, and then later on will do the same thing and share it at their school. So those are those aren't necessarily what you're thinking of, like with the big, huge sex exploitation things, but it's practically speaking what we see at a day-to-day level that's happening at our middle schools, sometimes at our elementary schools, and sometimes at our high schools. So it's just good to be aware of that. Because there are those varying levels. Girls, this stuff happens to all the time too, because you have girls who are feeling pressured by this boy that they like, that they think is cute, or they feel pressured by other people to send some of these photos. So those are things that we see realistically day to day. And a lot of people think, well, my child won't do that. And you don't really know until you have that conversation with your child. And so that's what's important, is to open that dialogue before it gets to that point, to make sure that they know, here's what's the reality of this. You don't have to do this. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they do all kinds of online research for these things that kids are facing. And they say that realistically, it's about 18 to 20% of teenagers who are sending nudes, like of themselves. But it's the other kids that are resending and resharing these things that are getting out there. So it seems like it's a lot of people that are doing it, but it's a small percentage of the kids. And then it's other kids that are just sharing that forward.
Yeah, which as a side note, sharing a nude picture of somebody else is actually child pornography and against the law. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it varies on how much that gets charged, just because of, if you have 12-year-olds sending pictures of other 12-year-olds, it muddies that water and it makes it harder. But there's absolutely legal and school consequences, administrative consequences. And then when you're talking to your kids, the other ramifications for like your reputation going forward, future jobs. And I'm sorry. I have ridiculous shenanigans happening. I'm so sorry. But the ramifications going forward of how that can hurt their reputation, whether it's trying to get a job or getting into college or any of those other places that they're wanting to go. And again, the consequences, administrative consequences at school, as well as legal consequences.
Yeah. So I think the reason why I brought that up is not necessarily, I mean, there are times where charges do need to be filed, or you do need to go to the
Yes.
police department, and it's reasonable to check it out, right? To find out,
Yes.
because it does impact your kid's reputation depending on
Yes.
how far it's gone and where it goes. And also, I've heard of, a kid sending a naked photo to somebody, then they distribute that, then that person who got the photo is then saying things to that kid, now send me pictures, right? Like,
Mhm.
and it can be, I mean, that's dehumanizing, right? It feels
Yes.
really terrible, and kids can feel trapped in that. And so I think, teaching our kids ahead of time is probably being proactive, and this
Yes.
is the best method. But sometimes we're not there, and there's going to be a parent who listens
Right.
to this today, and we haven't had those conversations, and no day is too soon to ask the question that you really want the answer to. I
Right.
mean, sometimes we don't actually want the answer to the question, but we do need the information, right, to help
Right.
protect our kids. Is, have you ever sent nudes? Has anybody ever asked you for naked pictures? Right? Is that something that you want to do? Here is also the laws around that, right? Something important that you need to know. And I think, something that's been important for me as an adult who, I remember we got AOL dial up when I was in
Right. Me
like
too.
middle school.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And but it's like anything that goes online is never really gone, right? I
Correct.
think
It's out there.
when people have this disappearing conversation thought, it's like nothing is ever really gone.
Right.
And I think, something else that I've learned that is happening online is kids are getting a hold of drugs too. So not just drug dealers are targeting kids too. Not that that's necessarily where we're going with this conversation today, but I think there are people looking to take advantage of our kids, right? Whether it's other
Yes.
kids,
Mm-hmm.
or it's, I mean, sometimes it's even family members, right? We know that
Yes.
child abuse oftentimes happens with somebody that they know, and they will use social media or an online platform to do that too, and to build trust. And I think, that's what hurts so bad when kids are taken advantage of, is
Right.
that they trusted those people and then somebody violated that trust. So how do we
Say hello, someone. Sorry, someone walked in here.
That's okay. So how do we protect our kids? Are there things that we can do? So we were talking about conversations, but like what other things can we do? And maybe how do we even have that conversation?
So one thing I would stress becoming aware of is at your schools, try to learn who your student resource officers are because they are a great resource. So if you have questions about things that may have already happened, or if there's things going forward and you want to ask them questions, they're a great resource and they're able to help facilitate some of those conversations. But realistically, the younger you can start having these open conversations with your kids, the better, because making them aware is really what will help empower them to make those right choices and helping them to know that they have a chance to make right or wrong, make those good choices. And really their friend group it's really important that we try to help make sure that the friend group that they're a part of, which is hard because we're not with them all the time, but their friend group is really a driving force behind a lot of the actions that they're going to take. So being one of those involved parents, you don't have to be a helicopter hovering parent, but just try to be as involved as you can, like having conversations like, hey, how are you doing at school? My son's in elementary school and we have had many, many discussions. He unfortunately is my child, so will not be privy to a lot of devices or internet access just because of the things that I've seen. But we've had conversations about, I know that there are other elementary students that are already vaping. So we talk about vapes, we talk about, I've shown him pictures of what they look like when I find discarded ones when we go on walks, like outside the high school, I pointed out to him. We talk about what are drugs and what are cigarettes. We talk about things like if his friends that do have a device, if they're showing him pictures or videos, we talk about what are good and bad videos. And we talk about really what makes a video bad is it appropriate? So we talk about what's appropriate, but we also talk about, does it make you uncomfortable? Is this something that's making you feel scared, or it's making you feel upset, or it's making you feel sad or embarrassed or things like that? Those are things that we need to think about when you're talking to your younger kids, even some of your middle school kids, talking to them about if this is anything that's making you feel uncomfortable, then it's probably wrong. And let's not look at it right now. It's probably for something you can deal with when you're older. But right now, you don't need to be looking at that or being a part of that. And so having those discussions about what are the things that, even in conversations, if someone's talking to you about something and it's making you uncomfortable, you don't have to participate. You can walk away. You can go do something else, even if it's one of your best friends. If they're doing something that's hurting you or making you mad, or it's making you sad or embarrassed in any way, then that's not something we want to engage in. That's not them being your friend. So take a break and go hang out with your other friend. If it's something that's really hurting you or really upsetting you, talk to a teacher or talk to your mom and dad or talk to a coach or talk to somebody that you have that you can talk to about those things. And it's really opening that dialogue from as early on as you can. And if there's parents out there that your kid is like a junior and senior in high school, it's not too late to open that up. The real thing is just making sure that your kids know they have someone that they can come and talk to and that they're not necessarily going to get in trouble for it. We've had kids where we find out later on, they come and they report things and they delayed reporting them because they were afraid their mom and dad were going to be upset. For me, if my son, who's 9 years old right now, if he was doing something online and somebody was abusing him in some way online or like making him feel uncomfortable in these ways, and he didn't come and talk to me about it because he thought he was going to get in trouble, that is way worse for me than anything else, because I don't want him to not share with me because he's afraid of what I'm going to do. So just making sure that you're that safe place that they can come and talk to. That doesn't mean that they're not going to face disciplinary actions later on, like maybe their devices get taken away, maybe they can't be online or they can't be that thing, but they can't do this thing that they want to do. But being that place where they can come and have that conversation, and then you can help them going forward to try to make it right, whether that's by filing a police report or talking to the school administration or the teacher, whatever needs to happen, but making sure that they can have that discussion. I think that's really the most important thing that we can do for our kids, because we aren't with them 24/7, and kids are always going to make a mistake, and it's okay to make mistakes. But if we prepare them ahead of time, then hopefully when we make those preparations and we help guide them ahead of time, those mistakes are smaller and not these big giant ones that are harder to recover from. So just having those discussions, like even now, I'm in the process of starting to have these discussions with my 9-year-old about What are the things that we talk about? What is good touch and bad touch? And they talk about that at school too, but talking about what that means on his, on when he's playing on a video game or something like that, just to make sure that he is aware. Because when he gets to middle school in 2 years, I have no idea what he's going to see when he's there. I know what it was like when I was in middle school. And middle school, it seems like, is when you really start to see an acceleration in all of these things.
Mhm.
So I want to do everything I can to empower him to make those decisions and to know what he thinks is right and wrong. So does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think you mentioned on having other people to talk about, I think there's this circle of trust that we can create with our kids where we talk about like having, up to 5 people or more. I mean, I think if you have those people, but like to identify who those people are with your kid, like, hey, do you want to talk to Aunt so and so? Do you want to talk to
Yes,
grandma? Do you want to talk to
absolutely.
coach so and so? Do you want to, talk to this person? And then you let that person know, hey, if my kid has something that comes up, I want you to know that my kid has identified you as a safe person to come to. So I want you to know, and you don't have to solve anything. Just
Right,
be there to listen and then let me know. And
right,
your kid to know like, hey, like they're going to let me know. I think obviously there's mandated reporters in the world
right.
and those make different things happen, but your kids can be aware of that. And as a therapist who is a mandated reporter, kids tell me things. And the first time they ever meet me, I go over confidentiality because I want to keep their trust. But kids tell me things. People will say, well, then they won't ever tell you anything. I'm like, actually, that's not happened. I mean, there may be kids who delay, right? Because they're kind of nervous or they kind of test me out to see, can I handle the things that they're going to say? But our kids want to tell us things, right? They
Right,
want to tell
right.
us what's going on and they leave little breadcrumbs of things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they might ask us a question that you're like, huh, that was weird, or they might say something, somebody else is doing this thing, and I think being very careful about how you come down on that, like
Yes,
I know this kid is sending nudes, right? And you say, oh, that's interesting, thanks for letting me know, how do you feel about that?
right. Yes,
Right. And to
absolutely.
keep very neutral, because I think that's the important part. If we are like, oh my gosh, that's terrible, don't ever do that. Oh, that person, you can't
Right,
hang out with them. Your kid might be just disclosing to you something that they have been doing. And you
right,
just said they're bad and what they're doing
right,
is inappropriate and whatever. And I think we can say, walk into that, right? Because if our kids bring it up, it's like, oh, what does that mean? What does taking nudes mean to you? Or what do you think that meant? Right. Because sometimes we don't even have the right information because they don't have the right lingo. Right. So we
right.
assume that what they're saying is X, but it's really Y. So I think getting curious is the most important part in that too, of like opening the doors to the conversations, because I know that even in my home where we have lots of really open conversations, a lot of times my kids are not going to bring the conversation to me. I
Right.
have to bring the conversation to them. So
Yes.
we're never going to be ready to talk to our kids about red light, green light touches, about body
Right.
awareness and body safety. We're never going to be ready to talk to our kids about sending nudes or receiving nudes, or the fact that there are people online who could be our friends, but also a predator potentially, right?
Right.
I think we're never going to be ready. But we have to know that when our kids have access to the internet, they have access to things, even at school, right? Like there are things that they have
Right.
access to. The school tries to lock things down as much as possible. But, in the car line, somebody has their phone and that parent doesn't have their phone locked down. And I don't think you can totally lock down any phone
Right.
completely.
Or on the
So
school bus.
yes,
Yeah.
right. And it's like those are the places that also those things happen. So we have to be, anytime our kids are out of our care, we don't know what's going to happen exactly. Not to be scared, but to prepare. And if your kid's prepared, they're most likely
Yes.
to going to come home and say, hey, mom, or hey, dad, or to some other trusted person, this thing happened and I didn't like it. Or this, like, what do you think about this? Or I don't know what this is. Or what does this word mean? Right. To just open those doors to those conversations. So that's a great place to start. Is that, are there things that we can do on our kids' devices to protect them too?
There are different things. One thing I want to add really fast before
Yeah.
we move on to that is be aware of your child too, because if there are kids that are having some of these issues, whether it's cyberbullying or whether they're being having some of these relationships online or the photos, sometimes there are telltale signs that you can see, like if they're starting to self-isolate more, if they're spending more time in their room or like in the basement, or you notice that they're spending a ridiculous amount of time on their phones, there's probably something going on. Also, and I know that sometimes it's hard to tell with kids, with middle school and teenage, if they're extra moody. Sometimes that's an indication that there's something going on too, but that could also just be them being a middle school or teenager. But just being aware of some of those things, and if they're going through any particular changes, that can help you to be aware and just say, hey, I just noticed that you've been in your room more. What's going on? Are you just tired? Is it a lot of stuff at school, or is there something else? And just opening up those discussions.
Yeah, that's great to
Um,
notice that part. And I think the truth is that even as a teenager, when I did have my like moody moments, I didn't really want to be moody, right? There
right,
probably
right.
was something that was contributing to that stress, right?
And
Overcommitment to things.
it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily a prolonged thing either. That was
Hmm.
usually like episodic. So it was here
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there. It wasn't just like your demeanor for like 3 weeks straight.
Hmm.
So, but if something's going on with your kid, it might be something that's more prolonged like that because they're engaging in something that they don't really know how to deal with and they don't really know how
Hmm.
to talk about. So that might be a way to just kind of open a door to conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think on that, I'll piggyback on that of like, I think it's also that there are things that kids are seeing that they're not ready to see. And
Yes,
to be
absolutely.
honest, I mean, there are a lot of things online that I am not ready to see,
Right.
right? Like in our house, during COVID, we turned off the news. We just
Yeah.
couldn't do it anymore. And we have not gone back, and I do not miss it like
Hmm.
at all. I mean, I think, we get information from different sources, but I think, that was impacting my mood. So then to
Yeah.
see something or to be part of something where you're being harassed or manipulated or forced into anything or coerced, right? Or you're doing something because you want the peer pressure, right? To feel like you fit in.
Right.
I think those things feel bad, and they are not aligned generally with who we are. And so we do notice something, our kid changes, right? To just be like, hey, are
Yeah.
you okay? Like, how are you feeling
Yeah.
today? Or what have you been seeing online? And how does that make you feel? And tell me about it. Or like, oh, I want to play a game with you, or whatever it is to engage the process, even if it's playing Minecraft with them to see what are they
Right.
seeing.
Right.
Um, and to be part of that, I think it's hard to know where the boundary is, but I think we are seeing research to say no technology is better, right? Like for
Right.
our brains and kids getting time outside. But when we are walking into this space of like we are providing our kids technology, whatever space we're choosing to do that at, we do need to have these conversations. So, how do we monitor our kids online and with their phones?
Yeah, so there are a lot of tools, like there's third-party softwares. I'm going to mention a few, but I'm just saying them because these happen to be ones that I know, and I know the kind of work that they're doing. So I'm not doing this. I'm not speaking for Lenexa PD. I just want to make that clear first.
Yes.
But there are different things, like third-party softwares that you can buy, like Bark. They have their own cell phones that are called, they're just Bark phones, and you can buy those and they help monitor, and they have all kinds of parental settings that you can put on that phone for your younger child. I think they have them for teenagers, or there's things called gap phones, things like that, that are cell phones that have the capabilities for like calling and texting, but they're limited in their access. Like you can't put on social media apps, or their wireless connection is limited to whatever you set it to. And there's different things like that. I've had a lot of people ask me, if you get a Gap phone or like a Bark phone, can it still send images? You could probably still get text message images through that unless you set up those filters. With Bark, it's going to have that monitoring software on there. And the nice thing about having us, there's many more than just Bark. It's just the one I've seen the most often. But the nice thing about having one like that is that it's using its own technology to go through and monitor those messages. So you don't have to be invading their privacy all the time and watching over their shoulder, everything that they're texting or everything that they're putting out there. It has, it knows the keywords, it knows the slang, it knows the emojis. So this AI tech goes through and it can notify you if they're having, like suicidal ideation, or if they're dealing with weapons or drugs, or if there's sexual content or any sort of violence. It'll send the parents a notification just through a text or an email that kind of updates you on, these red flag trigger words so that you can put that on there. And it might be something as simple as, like if your child is a volleyball player and they said, yeah, did you see my kills last night? Okay, you're gonna get a red flag about that, but you can read that and you can know they're talking about they spiked the ball in volleyball. So, but if it is anything where maybe they just put like the fire emoji because, or the gas emoji because they're trying to buy drugs, then you'll see that and it'll give you that alert because it knows those things and is constantly learning that. So that's a big one that I usually hear of. There's other ones that you can find just by searching online. The other thing I really want to stress is to be aware of what your kids are doing in the gaming world also, because a lot of times they'll have their headsets on while they're playing. And if they're talking to other people, depending on the settings, I would try to fix that to a more local setting instead of like the broad, so they're talking to anybody in the world. And you can set that through parental controls. But pay attention to some of the conversations that they have while they're on there, because sometimes, most of the time, they're just going to be talking about with their buddies about whatever they're teaming up for their video games. But every now and then you might hear something that they're having a conversation, like they're saying what school they go to, or they're talking about how old they are, or they're talking about more private information that is clearly not them talking to one of their friends. So you don't have to necessarily be there all of the time, 24/7, but just being aware of what's going on to find out. Because if my son, we have a PlayStation, we don't have any of the internet settings on when he plays. My husband does sometimes. But when he's playing, we don't have that. But if he does start doing that, I want to hear the conversations they're having because I want to know what's going on. Because sometimes that's another way they can get into the private chat and get like cell phone numbers and things like that. I would also stress not just your own devices, but be aware that it's not difficult for kids to be able to get an extra device. It doesn't happen all the time, but middle schools in particular, again, and some high schools are just full of places for them to find cellular devices. So I would just pay attention to if that is, if they have an extra device that's coming home with them, just be aware that that's always a possibility. Are a lot of kids doing that? It just depends on the setting. Some kids, yes, and some kids don't even have any idea how to do that. So, one other thing I would recommend that for monitoring purposes is don't let them have a device in their bedroom at night. I would have a central docking station where they can charge them. If it has to be with you, if it's in the kitchen, if it's in the living room, I would just make sure that that device is not in their room at night. And one nice thing about doing that is during that long period overnight, you can also see some of the alerts that pop up on their phone. And so sometimes that helps you to see extra apps that they might have. Another thing with cellular devices in particular, an iPad or tablets, is I would have them look through what apps they have on there. And if there's some you don't know what their function is, have them walk through like what that is. If it's a game you've never seen, say, hey, I want to see how you play this game. I want to see if it looks like they just put a calculator on there. Ask them to just show you, hey, why do you have a calculator? And what does this calculator do? And just walk through it, because some of those are disguised apps. And again, it's not necessarily all the time that it's this big nefarious plot. But I mean, kids are kids and they want to explore new things and they want to try new things. So just every once in a while, I would have that long period of time where it's resting and you see what kind of notifications come up, because that'll show you some of the other apps they're using. You don't have to necessarily look at what their notification is. I would just check what that app is. And as long as it's something that, like, you know, your child's on Instagram and here's a post saying that they're following Golden Retriever 245 and it pops up, and that's fine. They're watching a Golden Retriever channel. Cool. I know what Instagram is. But if you have one that pops up and you're like, what is this calendar thing? My child does not know how to run a calendar. And then check on it and just see what it is. And again, walk through it with them. And again, that's a part of having those open-ended conversations and being interested in what they're interested in, because most kids, even though they act like once they get to a certain age that they don't want us around, kids really want their parents to be involved. They want us to be involved in their lives, to know the games they're playing, to know the friends they're hanging out with. They want us to be a part of that. And so continuing to have that, even just by asking about, hey, what's this new app that you have right here? Also,
Mhm.
you can do parental control so they can't get new apps. But if they want one, you can have them walk it through it with you. And if
Mhm.
it's just some little game, whatever works in your household is perfectly fine, but at least then you know what they're putting on their device.
Yeah. Well, and I also have heard people say that like if your kid is spending like 3 hours on a calculator app, you should be curious about
Yes.
that because I don't know about
Yes.
you, but I definitely am not using my calculator for 3 hours. It's like
No.
10 seconds, right? Of just being curious about that piece of like the apps are getting so how do you say this, just like so secretive, right,
Yes.
sometimes
Uh-huh.
of what they are, and they look like a calculator app or a notes app or a calendar or a game, but when your kid is spending a lot of time on that or they just downloaded it, right, you should be
Right.
curious about that addition or
Right.
talking to them about like, oh, you want to add this, like tell me about it, what is it, let's look at it on my
Yes.
phone or let's look at it on the tablet, let's do it together to see what that's like, because if the kid can say, oh, you can't do this in the game or whatever, and that's not necessarily true, right? Like they
Right.
don't necessarily know, and it may not be that they're trying to trick you, it may just be that
Right.
they don't actually know, and maybe all their friends have it or somebody talked
Yes.
about it and
Absolutely.
they're curious about what it's like, and so it's that balance between keeping our kids safe and also allowing them the space to make decisions. And it's like, I'd rather my kid make a choice and be able to have a conversation about it and help them through it
Yes.
than for them to become adults who have no experience with anything and then make those choices then because the consequences are way bigger.
Yes.
I obviously there are some things that's hard to say around, but I think generally that's the way I would choose it is let's work through it, let's talk through it, let's be curious about our kids and figure out why they're choosing that, even if it is
Right.
something like vaping, right? Like, and
Right.
where they're at, obviously different than technology. So what do our kids need to know and how do we educate them about online stuff?
I think the biggest thing is just talking about what are some of those risks and what in your every family has their own set of values, their own set of things that would concern them. So talking with your kids about what each, if they want to start a social media profile, and that's absolutely up to every single parent whether they want to do that. But if your child is wanting to get on Instagram, before they get on Instagram, I would talk to them about what kind of photos or what kinds of things are appropriate to share. I would talk about your privacy, because you don't want them to post that, hey, I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks
Mhm.
and that my house is going to be empty. You don't want them to post things like that. You don't want them to post that, hey, I'm having a party at my house on Saturday, come on out, and then you have like 300 people show up at yours. You want
Which
to
has
talk to
really
them.
happened. That has
Yeah,
really
it
happened.
does.
Yes.
It does. It
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, you don't want them to be I'm sorry. You don't want them to be posting publicly and making their Instagram public, because unfortunately, the younger they are, particularly females, well, it happens to boys too, so I'm not going to say particularly females, but the younger they are, if they are publicly available out there on social media, the more pervasive the onslaught of unsolicited things that you don't want them to see. And unfortunately, that's been shown through some documentary series and things like that, that if you are a teenager, male or female, you are probably going to get things that you don't want to see happen to you if you're open. So I would for sure talk to them about making sure that if you are friending someone or requesting someone, that you know them in real life. Even golden retriever 234, I would make sure that that's actually legitimately just a golden retriever channel and not little things getting mixed in there. Um, so I would talk about that. A lot of kids like to watch a lot of things on YouTube or like video channels. So I would talk specifically with them about being careful what they're watching. I would try to fix your settings on there. The hard thing with YouTube is that sometimes you can have really great educational cartoon videos for kids. And sometimes some of those videos start that way, but then they turn, and after like 30 seconds, they become a really horrible video that you never wanted your child to see. And you had no idea because it looked like Mickey Mouse. So just being able to navigate that with them and talking to them about what are the things in your household that you think are things you don't want them to see. And with my son, if I'm sure all of your kids are the same way, my son is constantly like, why? Why can't I watch that? Why can't I see that? Why can't I do this? And it's not necessarily that you can't ever see those things or do those things. It's that right now, this isn't something that you're ready for. And then he always says, well, why? I'm not scared. And I said, you might not be scared or you might not think you're scared, but it's still something that you are a child right now and you should stay a child. You have your whole life to go ahead and see these things and be a part of these things. So let's focus on the kid things right now. Let's focus on this that's more your age appropriate. Because you don't need to see people hurting other people. You don't need to see people who are using things that you don't need to use. You don't need to see inappropriate photos of people. And you don't have to watch that. It looks like it's a cartoon, but it's not really.
Mm-hmm.
It's made for adults. This is adult content and not kid content.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot in our house about adult words and rude words. Not necessarily bad words, because I can't guarantee that some of them won't come out of mine or my husband's mouth sometimes. But we talk about what are rude words that aren't appropriate to use when you're certain ages. And like when you're in school or when you're out with your friends or when you're playing with your team, these are rude words and we don't need to use them because they're inappropriate and they're just rude and they can hurt someone's feelings. So that's something for when you're older. And so I do the same thing when I'm talking about videos, when I'm talking about we haven't had to talk about apps yet because he doesn't have a device, but he does now have a watch that is a gizmo watch. Again, I'm speaking as personal, but he has
Yeah.
one and I'm able to manually put in there who he can contact through that, but it has a school mode. You can't use this while you're in school. I set the school mode so when he can use it and not. And so we talk about why and when you can and when these things are appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
So did that answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. No, and I at our house, we have watches for our kids too, and it helps us to, know where they're at. Did they make it home from
Yes,
school? Those kind of
right.
things, and also being able to like contact us as parents
Yes,
and setting those things. And I think, that in our house has been a good in between of providing a phone, because we're
yes,
not ready, even though we have older kids or kids that are getting older, like a 12-year-old, we're just not ready.
I
And I
agree.
think we're gonna just keep going and see when we are ready. I don't
Right.
know that I'm ready for a phone. I mean, really, sometimes I just want to throw it out the window, right? Like,
Yes,
but it's like they have made it so enticing that everything is on the phone. All you need is your phone to go with you. And so I think, our kids see us using that.
right,
And so then they want that thing because it also steals our attention from them. And so
right,
that's something that I've been conscious of as a parent is like, if we only took our phone to work and we never use our phone any other time, our kids would not be as interested in that.
agreed.
Right. And
Yeah,
so I think we have to also, as parents, be thinking about that part of how much time are we putting ourselves on our phone. And so I set limits for myself when I get home. My phone notifications go off just because I want to be present with my kids and whatever is on there. Like obviously my husband's calls come through and a couple other
right,
contacts like their school and whatever. But besides that, I mean, it's like I want the pleasure of choosing when to check my phone versus being a slave to it. And I know that teenagers can
right.
really struggle with that of like, you look at their pickups and it's like 500 times and you're just like, that's how many times they're
Yeah,
looking for that feedback to know that they matter and that they're important, and they do matter and they are important without that phone, right? Like
right.
that thing is not determining their popularity or success in life, but it certainly
And do they even know who they're getting those notifications from?
so true.
Because are they, just because you're getting a like from someone doesn't mean that they care about you.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if my child had social media, would I be liking his stuff all the time? I don't know, but that doesn't mean that I
No.
don't care about him. But some random person that lives in California might be going through and liking his stuff, and I know that they don't care about him.
Yeah.
They just saw a picture and they just want to hit a button.
Yeah.
So I think that that's important too. And I do think, just like what you said, we are addicted to our own devices as parents, as adults. So if we are not able to set some of those limits on ourselves, I think that is exactly right. That's what our kids are seeing. And if you think about how hard it is for you as an adult to kind of curb that addiction to that, whatever that device is, how much harder is it going to be for someone who's 12 years old, who's 15 years old, who's 17 years old? It's because it's so pervasive and you constantly get notifications and you're always looking to see what's going on because you always have that device with you. So I do think that that's an important thing to note too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard, and especially with our frontal lobe not being fully developed, which is where we make our decisions and have full thought. I think it's hard for us to have those expectations. They can't set the boundaries for themselves a lot of times, and it is hard to walk away from that. So, okay, so tell me, what do you want parents to take away from this conversation? We downloaded a lot of good information.
I think the most important thing, if you didn't hear anything else or get anything else, it's beginning to open that dialogue with your kids and to brace yourself and not freak out when something comes up, when you hear that first time that your child says, oh, my friend sent this nude. It's not something that I as a parent want to hear. I don't want my son to say that he sent one or that he heard it, but preparing myself to have that conversation in a calm, collected way, because I want to have that conversation continue. Because if I freak out and I go off on him, he is never going to come back to me about it again. And that I think is the most important thing, because I want him to learn these things from me. I don't want him to learn these things from the other 4th graders or the other 6th graders or the other 10th graders. Because they don't know what they're talking about. I want him to hear those values from me. I want him to hear what is safe and not safe from me. And I want him to learn about these things from me and not from just any random kid that is just telling him, oh yeah, this is cool because I tried this the other day. You should try it too. No. So having that dialogue, having that place where they can come and have that discussion is so much more important than anything else you can know about what your device does or what's out there on the internet, because you will never know all of that information. It's impossible. I'm in this stuff every single day and there's always something new and I don't know it all. So there's no way that you can know all of that, but you can know your kid and you can know what they're doing and what they're being a part of. And you can have a relationship where you're able to at least talk about these things. And again, remember, they're going to make mistakes and that's okay. We've all made mistakes and those mistakes are what have helped us to get where we are today. So it's not the end of the world, but if you open that discussion, then this can be your opportunity to help them make much smaller mistakes and not the devastating ones that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for your time today. This has all been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again, Lindsey. That was great information. I know that there is so much to be thought about when we think about keeping our kids safe online and about helping them to stand up for what's right and to listen to their bodies and know what they do and do not want to do. I know this is also a family choice. And so you have to decide what the things are that you want your kids to take away with this and also to start the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and also rate and subscribe to our show. If you have a topic suggestion for a show, we would love to have it. Send that to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. With that, have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.